This is Edge of the Box, a podcast brought to you by WhoScored.com.
Hello, welcome to Edge of the Box, a podcast by Who Scored. Into our fourth week now, and as ever, I'm joined by the king of football trivia, Jonathan Wilson, and master statistician and tactician, Martin Laurence. I'm glad I managed to get that out. But before we get into it, whichever way you're taking your podcast, don't forget to subscribe to us and enjoy the show. Guys, a bit weird to be doing a podcast when there's still games going on at the time of filming on Thursday morning. There's still a couple of Premier League games to play in this round of fixtures, but looking back on what's happened over the last couple of games, I just wanted to get Jonathan, your favourite tactical takeaway, and Martin, your favourite stat.
I mean, obviously the big game this week was Liverpool-Tottenham. And I did wonder in that game whether we saw some of the reasons why Mourinho's way of playing hasn't been that successful recently. And I think you can draw a comparison as well with the Palace game. So Tottenham have dropped 3 points to goals in the last 10 minutes in the last two games. And both of them, I sort of had a sense they were getting needlessly defensive. So at Liverpool, taking off Bergwijn and bringing on Reguilón, you're going to two left-backs, which I presume was aimed at sort of blocking off Trent Alexander-Arnold, or maybe even trying to sort of lure him forward so Son could attack the space behind him. So doing that with quarter of an hour to go, that just seemed to me to remove Tottenham's counter-attacking punch. It was so negative that the only thing that was going to happen was a siege of their goal. And I think what we've seen in the last decade or so is that for all the many flaws with the recent changes to the laws, one thing football has got very right is it is much harder now to kill a game than it used to be. You can't make a series of tactical fouls. You do end up getting punished for that. And also, I think the best teams now are just better at breaking down mass defences than they were a decade ago. And even, when I say the best teams, that would appear to include Crystal Palace on that logic. And so by inviting pressure, Tottenham have sort of given away points they didn't need to. And you look back and you think of a West Ham game as well, when it was 3 goals in the last 10 minutes. And so there's 5 points they've tossed away by virtue of getting deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah, I think there's the Newcastle game as well, wasn't there, near the start of the season, where Newcastle did nothing yet ended up taking away a point off Spurs. So, but in general, Jonathan, I thought they attacked quite well, and if anything, I thought at times Spurs were going to be the ones that nicked the game.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the first sort of 25 minutes of the second half, Tottenham were the more likely side to score. And so there's been a lot of sort of derision of what Mourinho said afterwards of we were the better team. Well, depends how you define better, but they did win the XG. I mean, they won it by about, depending which model you look at, they won it by about quarter of a goal. But the XG had it as sort of roughly 1-1, but with Tottenham with a slight edge. More traditional ways of looking at the balance of a game. Liverpool had 3/4 of the ball. They had, I think, 11 shots on target to 2, would suggest that the Liverpool were better. And I think you also, when you look at a specific game, you see one of the flaws of XG for looking at one game, which is that Liverpool had that sort of, particularly in that last quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, they had a load of sort of menace, and I guess in the first half as well. They were sort of around the box, they were threatening, they were probing, they were putting crosses in that weren't creating chances. So it's still a threat. It's still putting Tottenham under pressure. It's still part of the process of winning a game. It can still lead to winning the game. But because it doesn't actually create a chance, it doesn't register on the XG. Now, I guess over the course of a whole season, that probably does work itself out. But in very small periods of time, or a half or 20 minutes of a game, maybe the XG doesn't quite represent that.
No, I mean, Mourinho's definitely come away and thought the Spurs were the better side as well. I'm not sure how much we read into that. Martin, your favourite stat from the midweek round of fixtures so far?
Steve Bruce's Newcastle, after the midweek fixtures, Steve Bruce's Newcastle have scored more than once in a game, more often than Pep Guardiola's Manchester City this season, which I quite like. I quite like. Man City have only scored multiple goals in five games this season, and Newcastle have now managed it in 6. So yes, Steve Bruce, Enio.
Do you think people are going to start writing books about Steve Bruce's tactics off the back of that now?
Don't know. No, not quite sure about that. Obviously lost. It is worth saying that they lost 5-2. So it's not much of a victory. But yeah, just I think that's incredible, really. Obviously, it's more of a slight against against Man City than a sort of praise of Newcastle. But Newcastle have started scoring more goals. Obviously, that's due to Callum Wilson as much as anything. But yeah, for them to have scored more sort of multiple goals in a game than Man City is quite remarkable, I'd say.
So what you're saying essentially is that City should sign Joe Linton. That's what I'm hearing here.
Now, Martin, you're bringing the statistical vibe. Jonathan, you bring the knowledge, the power to the podcast. I'm not sure what I bring, but I've been asked to pick out my favourite moment from the midweek fixtures, and I've gone with a quite basic one, to be fair, and that's that Theo Walcott simply celebrating against his old side, just because it's so rare. But what did you make of that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I got no problems about players not celebrating. The thing is, it's one of those things that began as being quite a nice gesture. So I remember, for instance, when Julio Arca scored for Middlesbrough against Sunderland, who he'd left the previous season. He'd only left because Sunderland got relegated, and everybody knew he was too good for a team in the Championship. So, of course, he left. And he left with a lot of affection. And he scores for Middlesbrough against Sunderland, and he didn't celebrate. And that seemed to me, that's nice. He sort of remembered that, 6 months ago he was playing for us, and he married to his Sunderland season ticket holder. But when that then becomes sort of such a defining thing that the to celebrate, becomes something away from the normal, and the players who played sort of 3 games on loan when they were 16 decide not to celebrate 15 years later, that just seems preposterous. So I've got absolutely no problem with a player celebrating, particularly not when they've been away for a few years. And it was a lovely finish. It was a classic Theo Walcott goal. But I actually thought you were going to say Wolves beating Chelsea, given you appear to have Wolves-coloured balloons up in celebration.
Don't even get me started. This was there's been a birthday. Only balloons we had in the house. Absolute disaster as a Villa fan when we're playing Wolves at the weekend, and I'm watching the game with these balloons above the TV. But thankfully, the result of the weekend went the right way. We'll move on. We've already talked about Southampton a little bit with Theo Walcott at the top end of the show, but it's Southampton, Man City, one of the big games coming up this weekend. Jonathan, just how far have they come under Ralph Hasenhüttl?
He has done a brilliant job, and almost too brilliant. I think if I was a Southampton fan, I'd be very worried about losing him, particularly with sort of Dortmund in the market for a new manager. But yeah, he's done a sensational job. He's imposed a style of football, which I guess Southampton have been trying to play for a while, from the Pochettino days of trying to play that high press. But he's taking it to another level. They got 2 forwards who are right in form in Ings and Adams. And they're a really dangerous side. And in this very strange season, they are a challenger for the Champions League place. I don't think they'll take top 4, but they certainly have a very good chance to get in Europa League.
Yeah, I mean, if they want to be challenging for the Champions League, they've got to be beating relegation fodder like Arsenal that they played last night. Martin, just how much credit does Southampton deserve for sticking with him? Because about a year ago, they were in a little bit of trouble. They'd obviously shipped 9 to Leicester in that famous game, and there were calls that he could go. They've stuck with him, and the rise in a year is just incredible, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think there was any. Well, there was probably slight calls. I don't think there was any real pressure from him from Southampton. I don't think they ever really got to that point, despite the 9-0 defeat, like you say. But what I do think was important at that time, which was, I think it was 10 games into last season, so a little bit before where we are now, was the game immediately after that defeat to Leicester was against Man City, who they've got this weekend. So there was the chance there that they could lose 9-0 and then get hammered by Man City, and then it might have been a bit different. And I think they played Arsenal after that and got a point. But they had 2 tough fixtures at the time directly after. So if they'd lost those games heavily, they did lose to Man City, but they only lost 2-1. And that was just to show. But even though they lost, obviously, to come back from losing 9-0 against Leicester to then, I think they opened the scoring against Man City and conceded 2 late goals. But it was quite clear quite immediately that it wasn't a crisis. And if they'd lost 3 or 4 against Man City, then Hasenhüttl might have come under a bit more pressure, like you say. But they were obviously completely justified to stick with him. I don't think there's ever been any panic. I don't think Southampton fans were ever really calling for his head. And obviously they love him now, and rightly so. And I think what Jonathan says about sort of other clubs looking at him, I think that's inevitable. And I think obviously there's Dortmund, and he has managed RB Leipzig in Germany. So that would be a sort of natural path back. But there's also the potential of Arsenal and Manchester United, who, in my mind, if they are sort of considering other options, he's got to be right up there. I think you'd be looking at Pochettino as well, but certainly don't think he'd go to Arsenal. Maybe I'm wrong. But if I was an Arsenal fan and Arteta doesn't pick up some wins, obviously they got the result against Southampton in the week and clung on to that. But I'm not sure how much time Arteta's got left. If they lose this weekend, then it will be back to pressure on. But if I was an Arsenal fan, he would be my number one sort of on my wish list. Just because I think the way that they play, there's such a great intensity to it. And they've always, you've seen the whole way through, they've always played for him. Even when they got battered, they've always played for him. And that's maybe what you don't see at Arsenal with Arteta at the moment, to an extent. And there's not a clear plan there where there is with Southampton. They've got a pretty modest team, really, but he gets the best out of them. And Arsenal now have a pretty modest team. So that's the sort of manager that they should be looking for. And I think he's done a fantastic job. And in that first half, most of the first half at least, against Arsenal, they completely dominate, like without actually playing particularly well. They just controlled that game completely. So yeah, he's done an incredible job and will be on the wish lists of a few clubs, I'm sure.
And there's something quite odd about big defeats, aren't there? That although they sort of stick in the mind, I think it's actually quite unusual for a team to get beaten 8 or 9-0 and then get relegated. So that win for Leicester became the record away win in the top flight. And they took the record from Sunderland, who'd set it against Newcastle in December 1908. And that season, Newcastle went on to win the title. Now, okay, it's 1908. Football's different then. But Sunderland have let in 8 3 times in the top flight, haven't been relegated in any of the seasons. You think of when Wigan got hammered by Spurs, they didn't get relegated that season. It's almost like you're using up all the goals you're conceding in one game. And that's quite a useful thing, rather than losing every game by a single goal as Sheffield United do. That's their mistake.
Southampton have kind of gone back to that phase where they'll lose a player, but it just doesn't affect them. So they lost their captain, obviously Højbjerg, to I've said his name about 5 different ways across the four podcasts, but he's gone to Spurs. But Romeo's just come back in, not from nowhere, but wasn't really utilised much last season. He comes in and just fills in and does exactly the same job. They're kind of back at that point they were under Koeman and Poch, aren't they?
Yeah, and I do think in Romeo they're not exactly the same. I think I watched the game yesterday, and I think in the commentary they said they're completely different players. I don't think they are completely different players. First and foremost, they're ball winners, and they're both players who've also played at clubs and had a sort of grounding at clubs that play passing football. Romeo started at Barcelona, and Højbjerg was one of Pep Guardiola's sort of proteges at Bayern. So they do have similarities there. And like you say, Romeo was quite a favourite he's been one who's come sort of in and out. I think it was actually Ward-Prowse who sort of took his place initially rather than Højbjerg, because Ward-Prowse was in and out, but now he's played. I think Ward-Prowse has played every minute since that 9-0 defeat to Leicester, and he wasn't sort of a guaranteed starter beforehand. So yeah, he's been able to adapt well, because I think Romeo and Højbjerg are similar players. I think Højbjerg's a better player slightly, but they are a similar type, and that's been a sort of like for like. They did sign Ibrahima Diallo in the summer, but he hasn't got a look in yet, and understandably so, because their pairing is just playing so well at the moment. But yeah, it is a case where Southampton are very good at recruiting in general. And I think, like Jonathan says, that's because they've got a clear plan from sort of top to bottom. And Hasenhüttl's obviously a big part of that.
Let's talk a little bit about Man City now, who I still have not forgiven because I went heavy with them on fantasy football midweek, and they've absolutely killed me with a 1-1 at home to West Brom. But Gabriel Jesus, is he good enough, Jonathan? He was very, very quiet midweek. In general, though, Aguero's going to go at some point. Is Jesus the man to replace him?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I sort of feel with Jesus, he's getting to quite a key phase of his career that I sort of sense he could be one of those players who suddenly, as Salah did, for instance, suddenly scores 40 goals in a season, and we're sort of, oh yeah, why didn't we see that before? He clearly does a lot that Guardiola likes. His work rate is great. His movement is great. He leads the press very well. But the question always will be, is he a good enough finisher? Now, to an extent, that doesn't matter if he has players going beyond him and scoring the goals. So, it doesn't matter that Roberto Firmino's only scored 3 goals this season, because he has Mane and Salah scoring goals, and Diogo Jota. But Sterling's a little bit not quite his best, certainly in terms of finishing. Riyad Mahrez, okay, he got that hat-trick, but again, has been a bit in and out this season. They don't really have a direct replacement for Leroy Sané, who had that pace and directness. And maybe Ferran Torres can become that player, but Guardiola's still using him sparingly. So I'm not saying he's not that player, but I'm not convinced that he is that player. And I think the replacement of Aguero, that doesn't necessarily, when you replace Aguero, it doesn't mean that Gabriel Jesus gets shunted aside. It just means you bring in somebody who's probably more of a guarantee of goals than Jesus is. And it may be that the replacement plays against weaker sides and racks up loads of goals, and Jesus plays against better sides when the pressing and the movement and the discipline are more valuable.
I mean, Man City, I watched them on Tuesday night, and at times I don't really get them anymore. You used to watch them and be in awe of what they were doing, but over the last couple of years, there's certainly been a downturn. And I was watching them on Tuesday. I struggled to break down West Brom. And Martin, this might be a really simplistic way of looking at it. It probably is because it's coming from me. But I'm watching a couple of their players and thinking, I wouldn't want them in the Villa team, who I support. Mendy, Rodri. I genuinely wouldn't want them in the Villa team. That might be harsh, and as I say, it might be a simplistic view and way of looking at things. But do you know what I mean? I don't get what they are at the moment.
I would have them at Sunderland, just to be clear.
Big shout. Yeah, no, I get what you mean. There's definitely. I think we've been so used to City having this squad that's littered with superstars, and that's not the case anymore. They're all good players, of course they are. But there is a drop off in quality when you lose the sort of, not just the quality of player that they have over the years, but they've lost icons basically year after year. And Aguero will be the next one when he does sort of either go or just stop being able to perform consistently. Maybe that's already happened. We don't really know. But obviously they've lost leaders. They lost Toure, Kompany, now David Silva, pretty much back-to-back seasons. It's hard to replace that level of quality. I don't think they've gone about it particularly well with some of their signings. But yeah, there are definitely weaknesses in that team, and at the moment, Jesus is looking like one of them. In that game against West Brom, I think it was pertinent that Aguero came on and he only had one touch in the box fewer than Jesus, and he only played something like 20 minutes compared to Jesus, who played the whole 90. Andrew Robertson's had more touches in the opposition box than Gabriel Jesus this season. So there's a problem there, because that's confusing to me, because the thing I always thought about Gabriel Jesus was his finishing was suspect, but he always got into goal scoring positions. Always. I think last season he only started 20 games and he ended the season with the highest XG, underperformed it. But that shows you he's getting into positions, and obviously that's what's stopped. And I'm not sure that's all his fault. That's part of the system, and that's part of the players not being able to create for him. But even when he is getting touches in the box, he just looks less clinical in mind as well as in finish. I think he's just sort of hesitating a little bit more. The game against Tottenham sticks to mind, where he just he got the ball in the box every now and again, but he had one or two too many touches, tried to pick out a teammate. And like Jonathan says, he is a selfless player and he's got lots of attributes. But whether he will have that clinical attribute, which is what obviously Man City are so used to with Sergio Aguero, is a big question. And I think they have to start identifying a replacement for Sergio Aguero, a potential replacement for Sergio Aguero. I think the obvious one that every club would want right now is Erling Haaland.
Sure.
But how much is Erling Haaland? 200 million probably. But that would kind of make sense. He would be going back to a club where his dad ended his career, or had his career ended, probably more fitting. So he was born in England. I think there is the time will come when he probably will move to England, and Man City will surely be one of the clubs that are looking at him.
Yeah, they certainly should be. I mean, now we've finished character assassinating one Manchester club. We'll move on to the next. Manchester United at home to Leeds this weekend. Now, Jonathan, I don't know whether you've been waiting for it, whether you'd forgotten about it, but we haven't done the trivia yet. Were you aware of that?
It had been lurking.
Yeah, well, I think you've been lurking in Martin's mind, because he's changed the format up a little bit. He's obviously not happy that you've done well the last 2 weeks, and he's asked for a different format to be introduced. So the trivia is obviously going to be based around the Man U Leeds game, which we'll come on to shortly. But Martin's new format is there's two answers. If you get both right, Jonathan, you will get the point. If you get both wrong, Martin's going to get the point. And if you get one of them right and one of them wrong, obviously it will be a draw. So first off, what do you make of that rule, the rule change? Mid-season?
Yeah, that's non-ideal, but I understand that he's on the back foot and he's desperately clutching whatever straws are available.
It's not a permanent rule change. I'm just trying to keep it fresh. Just trying to keep it fresh, guys. Just keeping Jonathan on his toes. I don't want him to be able to guess what's going to happen like he tried to the first time around.
Okay, fair enough. Well, you're aware of this rule change just for 1 week then, Jonathan, so I'll give you the question. In the last league meeting between Manchester United and Leeds, one Brazilian started the game and one Norwegian started the game. Name those players. So you've got the rest of the show to have a think about that, and we'll come back to you at the end.
One Brazilian, one Norwegian.
Yes.
Yeah. That was, 2004 would it have been? The last league game between them.
Right.
It's your question, Martin. I felt like you were looking at me for validation.
Yeah, that is right, I'm sure.
To put you on the spot again, Jonathan, and to make you a little bit more nervous, I got it.
You got them both?
Yeah, I did.
Well,
surprise that. No, come on, no. We'll come back to
it. Your record in this is as good as mine.
I know, and yet I still feel like Martin thinks I'm quite simple with football knowledge. I'm getting them every week, but yeah, I'm backing you to get them both. I think you'll get them both anyway, but we'll come back to it at the end of the show. Let's talk about Man U first, then. Donny van der Beek, a good signing because he's obviously a very, very good player, Martin, but a strange situation that he doesn't play games.
Yeah, and like you say, a good signing because he's a good player, but he's certainly not what they needed most, not even probably top 5 what they needed most. So it was a curious signing in that respect, but I think it was just a case of he's available for, 40 million, which is a pretty good price. And Manchester United thought they'd get in there because obviously Real Madrid were very interested before, decided not to because they didn't really want to spend the money in these times. So he ended up at Manchester United. I don't think that was necessarily what him or his agent wanted, but it happened. And obviously there's just the question. I think it was decent sort of forward thinking from United in the fact that they probably trying to look beyond Paul Pogba, which makes sense because you can't rely on him. But it was the case, obviously, that they signed Bruno Fernandes 6 months previous. I'm not saying they're similar players because they're very different skill sets, but it is the case where you've got that many players that you need to fit into one area of the team without losing defensive solidity, which has been proven that this Manchester United team needs. They really need a solid base and then to counter. So whether you certainly can't, I certainly don't think you can play Pogba, Van der Beek and Fernandes. Whether you can play Van der Beek and Fernandes in the same team, we've not yet really seen because I think they've only started one league game together or only sort of completed the 90 once together, I think at least. And I think it's actually pertinent that game was Southampton and Van der Beek's selection in that game was because he's facing a pressing team. And Van der Beek is probably Manchester United's best player at beating a press. Very good in tight spaces, plays quickly, plays simple, plays quickly. The Ajax way, moves the ball very quickly and circulates it. And he's better at beating the press than any other team, which is why I personally think he may well start against Leeds this weekend. I think he should start against Leeds this weekend because there's so much about the press, there's so much about intensity. And if there's one player that can sort of counter that, it's probably Donny van der Beek. So how he fits in a team with Bruno Fernandes, because Bruno Fernandes has to play, I think is the sort of real question. But yeah, a good signing. But like I said, I'd have looked at 3, 4, 5 other areas of the team before I looked at that one.
What do you make of it, Jonathan? Where does he fit at Man U?
I mean, I think he is a versatile midfielder. I think he can theoretically play in any of the sort of 3 midfield positions. But the way he was used most often at Ajax was in that Fernandes position. So lessening the burden on Fernandes, that makes sense. And yet he hasn't really done that yet. He's only started, 2 games he started, I think, this season in the league.
Yeah.
No, I think he can play deep. I think he can play in that sort of the sort of in between role. But But what I don't get is just the fact that he hasn't been used more. It's not as if United have some incredibly complex system, incredibly complex philosophy he has to learn. It's a pretty basic, straightforward philosophy. In a sense, he's almost got to unlearn what he knew at Ajax. So yeah, it mystifies me. I mean, I can see why you can get a player that good for 40 million quid. Yeah, go out and do it if you can afford it. But then there doesn't seem to be any sort of thought as to how he might be used, how he might fit in, despite this compression of the calendar that we keep on being told about. So, I mean, I think Leeds might struggle here just because they don't do well against teams who sit deep against them. So, I think United will sit deep. I think that's how they naturally would prefer to play. I think if they had a crowd there, they might not be too happy with doing that against Leeds. But in the absence of a crowd, they can. And so it's the kind of game that Leeds have been losing recently.
What have you made of Leeds this season, Jonathan? Now, I find it quite an odd side to watch. Like, they're so good going forward. The press is obviously unbelievable. We've never seen that kind of thing here in this country. But defensively, unless they improve, they aren't going to win many games.
Yeah, that's completely the issue. That they're letting in near enough 2 goals a game, and so occasionally you'll be able to score 5 and you'll win the game quite easily. But that you can't rely on that. I mean, I think they've 3 times this season had 25 or more shots, and there's only 5 instances of that happening. 60% of the times it's happened this season have been them. One of those was against Arsenal when they didn't score, though they did hit the woodwork 3 times. So look, they're great to watch. I really enjoy. I mean, I find it slightly stressful to watch them just because it's so relentless. But I do enjoy watching them. I enjoy the fact that the players seem to appear in positions where they just don't appear for other teams. You look at their second goal against Newcastle, the 5th goal against Newcastle. They're both brilliant goals, but defensively they're not good enough. I think they're always vulnerable to a team like West Ham, who are good in the air from set plays. Now, Bielsa has sort of said this is before the Newcastle game, so it's only half true that they struggle from that, and it's just because there happens to have been a sort of concentration of those recently. But then there was another one against Newcastle, so that would be a concern, and it's a way that you'd look at United and you'd look at Harry Maguire, say, from a set play, and they definitely have the. I mean, it feels weird to be talking about how can United unsettle Leeds. It really should be the other way around, and yet it is. How do United unsettle Leeds?
I mean, Martin, you had a few critiques of Leeds, but then they pretty much blew up your notes last night by winning 5-2. Do you want to just talk about some of the reservations that you did have, and whether they've been rectified by what you saw last night?
Before last night, my sort of angle for this was that they were too reliant on Patrick Bamford, particularly from open play, and they're fit. Like, as much as they're a very good attacking team, their finishing hasn't been good beyond Bamford, and even Bamford's missed a lot of good chances. Before last night, he was the only player to have scored more than once for Leeds in open play. He scored 9 in open play, so that's a lot, and that's fine if he continues to do that. But what we know about Patrick Bamford is that he's not overly consistent over a season. I think it's for many a surprise that he's even playing, or not on current form, obviously. But this season, I think most Leeds fans were probably expecting Rodrigo to start up front. And at the time, I thought if that is the case, which to be fair, I assumed was the case, that was a really odd signing, almost in line with the sort of Joe Ellington signing, not in terms of, I'm not slating Rodrigo or Joe Ellington, but in the case that they're not prolific goal scorers. Rodrigo's record in Spain for the last couple of years has been really sort of modest at best. So I expected him to replace Bamford and Bamford to be on the bench, because Leeds fans, I think even now there's plenty of Leeds fans who are not pro Patrick Bamford and are finding it quite hard to accept that he's scoring so freely in the Premier League. So yeah, the fact that he's sort of played in a withdrawn role, probably more like a replacement for Pablo Hernandez, who's obviously mid-30s, actually came off the bench and had an impact last night. But I think that game last night was just another example, like Jonathan says, where they need teams to come out against them, and you wouldn't have expected that to be Newcastle, and it wasn't for much of the game, but they killed the game at the end of the game on the counter, and it's kind of what they did against Villa. The game got really open, and then they just blitzed Aston Villa once they'd scored, and they can do that. So yeah, I had reservations in that sense that they didn't have enough goal scorers, and if Patrick Bamford's goals dried up, that I think they'd struggle. They'd start to struggle at both ends. Because I think the main discussion with Leeds is that sort of there was the thing with Gabby Agbonlahor and TalkSport where he sort of was very anti-Leeds, where he basically made the case where if you can outwork Leeds, then you'll win if you can outrun them. And I don't actually think that's that wide of the mark, because they don't have star quality in their team. What I'd worry for United is that I don't think they're a team that can outwork Leeds.
But I mean, to be fair, that's a ludicrous thing to say. It's like saying, well, if you can just run 100 meters quicker than Usain Bolt, you'll win the gold medal. Like, yeah, nobody outworks Leeds because they are phenomenally well conditioned. They've got the lowest body fat percentage in the league. You know, they're driven harder than any other side, and they're not in any other competition. They managed to get themselves knocked out of everything apart from the FA Cup, and I'm sure they'll get themselves knocked out of that pretty quickly.
I think that's the point that sort of Agbonlahor was missing, in that, like you say, it just doesn't happen very often. Well, barely ever. And I think he was sort of saying that Bielsa's a bit of a fraud, but again, he's completely missing the point that Bielsa has got an incredible amount out of an incredibly modest team. Even now, I think most even Leeds fans would say their team is still really, if you take Bielsa away and what he's done pre-Bielsa, they're still a sort of middling championship team. A lot of the players in that team, they or at least were before Bielsa came in, pretty average players, and he's improved them remarkably. And obviously,
yeah, I mean, even last season they had the 7th highest wage bill in the championship. So that was after one season of Bielsa. They still only had the 7th highest.
I think there's been a lot of questions, obviously, about him being in the sort of coach of the year category, and a lot of people have sort of panned that. And I understand, like, there's lots of candidates that could have been there ahead of him. But I just think what he's done is incredible. Like their team, I look at their team on paper, and I just think, like, who are you taking from that as an individual? I don't think you're taking from most teams. I don't think you're saying, oh, I'd love him at my club. It's just that they're a collective, and they work so hard for him. So what Bielsa's done there is, I think, it's absolutely remarkable.
But it's also the normal things, normal means by which you judge a coach. They don't necessarily apply to Bielsa. You know, the thing he has a phenomenal capacity to do, and the thing he did at Marseille and at Bilbao and did at Newell's and did at Vélez and did with Chile, and to a lesser extent with Argentina, but to an extent, it's just to inspire everybody. You know, I mean, I remember going to the Scarborough Festival to the cricket, and he'd been in charge for 3 games at that point. And I was sat in the stand, Yorkshire v Worcestershire, and I was surrounded by this load of, I don't know, 8, 10, 70-odd-year-old Yorkshiremen, the classic sort of blunt, dour. And they were talking like a 15-year-old having their first crush at school. They were completely kind of swept up by it. And you sort of see the way that it's not just he's taken Leeds up after 16 years. He's restored this sort of love of the game in Leeds. And that is something that to me matters at least as much as cups and winning games. Certainly for the side of that stature. And then even on this sort of notion that you can't apply normal logic to him. I was thinking, watching that game against Newcastle on Wednesday. Yeah, I'd gone into that game thinking, oh, Newcastle can trouble Leeds from set plays. And sure enough, Newcastle do score a goal from a set play. But Leeds score 2 goals from Newcastle set plays. So can we say his defending is wrong if his team's outscoring the opposition from their own corners? I'm not sure you can.
Actually, we look at the combined 11, Martin, it kind of backs up what you've been saying about there being no superstars in the Leeds side. Because I look at this side in general, and I think that's a pretty ordinary side. But you've gone for another formation change this week. I think it should be a 4-2-3-1. You've said it's a 4-3-3 though, and you're not backing down from that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm sticking with it.
Okay, so just run you through the team. Surprisingly, more Leeds players than there is Man U players. Well, I don't even know if that is a surprise at this point. But we've got Meslier in goal, Wan-Bissaka, Liam Cooper, Maguire, and Dallas make up the back 4. We've got Calvin Phillips, Scott McTominay and Bruno Fernandes as the three in midfield. And then on the right, Marcus Rashford. On the left, Jack Harrison. And then Patrick Bamford, unsurprisingly, leads the line. Jonathan, what do you make of that side?
Well, the two Leeds players who really stood out for me this season have been Dallas and Phillips. So that makes complete sense. I'm possibly on instinct, I'd have picked Klich ahead of McTominay. I'm not sure about Rashford playing from the right. So I'd probably move him to the left and not have Harrison, but then who do you bring on the right? I don't think that's obvious at all, because I think Helder Costa was causing Leeds some problems there early in the season. I thought his axis with Ayling wasn't really working. They obviously had Rafinha come in there. So maybe him. I don't know if he's played enough games yet. But yeah, I'm more comfortable with 4-3-3 than any of this nonsense we've been playing recently. And I think with Calvin Phillips, it makes complete sense to have him flanked by two rather than have another player alongside him, just because he needs the players ahead of him to give him the passing options. And he's good enough in that role that I'm not sure he really needs the defensive support. I think he's been brilliant this season. And I think, hopefully, for England in the summer, he can do that job.
Thank you, Jonathan, because that was going to be my justification for poo-pooing Dan's 4-2-3-1. I wanted Fernandes and McTominay either side of Phillips. I think that's actually probably the best balanced midfield that we've had so far. And I agree. The issue for the is the right flank, obviously. Bit cheeky moving Rashford out there because he's only played there in the Champions League this season. But I was going to say I agree with Phillips and Dallas, but I also think Jack Harrison's been really, really good. Last night he was excellent assist for Rodrigo's goal, and obviously an outstanding goal as well. So I was keen to get him in, and he for what it's worth as well. Klich and McTominay, the rating difference is 0.02. So yeah, very, very tight. So that was a close one. But yeah, I think, like you say, alongside Fernandes, obviously, I think Calvin Phillips is the star of that team, and I think, like Jonathan says, I'd personally like to see him playing for England, and but crucially in a system that fits him. I don't think we should be building a team around Calvin Phillips, but I think England's team now makes sense as a three in midfield with Phillips as the sort of anchor to that, playing like spraying the passes, and then you'd have, in my opinion, Mason Mount and Jordan Henderson in a three, and I think that would work. Obviously, Declan Rice becomes the one to miss out. And I think it was interesting. The game previous was obviously West Ham Leeds, and Rice actually had a better game than Phillips in that game in what was sort of a bit of a sort of early audition for England. I think, because I think they will be playing for the same spot. I know they've played together in Phillips's debut, but just didn't work. Doesn't work. I don't think Phillips works in a two. Which is why you're wrong, Dan, on this one, I'm afraid. I'd
hear and justify it, but I don't think we've got the time. I'd love to prove you both wrong, but I don't think we've got the time to go through that. Jonathan, I'll let you finish by. I think I know who you'll say, but do you want to choose a manager of the two to manage this side?
I'll go Bielsa.
I thought you might. A savvy answer. Yeah. Next game on the list is Chelsea v West Ham. Now, we pretty much all bigged up Chelsea last week on the podcast. We were talking about whether they could be genuine title contenders, whether they are the genuine article. And then, Martin, they go and lose twice.
Yeah, I think, I was saying, I think Jonathan would have a point to say about that, whether he thought they were genuine title contenders. But he was coming round to it against after the Leeds game, which, like I said, I was really impressed by. But yeah, back down to earth a little bit. And I think it's a case of, obviously, their signings all bedded in so quickly. Now there's been a little bit of a drop-off in their part. The sort of wheels have come off the Edouard Mendy's the best goalkeeper in the world bus. And Havertz and Werner are now sort of in the firing line, just not quite clicking, not quite gelling for them at the moment. Obviously, Werner's still getting into goal-scoring positions a lot, but his finishing's been off. Havertz is probably the question mark for me. He's the one who just hasn't looked convincing yet, and I think we need to bear in mind that he's a very young player, learning a new league, a new system to an extent. I don't think Lampard knows what his position is. I'm not sure it's particularly clear, to be fair to Lampard, what Kai Havertz's best position is. Like I said, he is very young, and he played at Leverkusen in quite a lot of positions and played them all pretty well. And sometimes that's not helpful. Sometimes you need a clear idea of where this player fits, and I think you need that when this player's your club record signing. They spent a hell of a lot of money on Kai Havertz, so there is always going to be criticism when he's not performing, and he has been the sort of signing that's certainly been the least convincing. So I think that's one of the main sort of things that Frank Lampard really needs to solve, is how you get the best out of Kai Havertz. And I still don't think he's getting the best out of Timo Werner, but another debate, I guess.
Jonathan, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit because this has just popped into my head. But do you remember when Chelsea signed Ballack, and you were kind of thinking, where does he fit? Obviously a sensational footballer, one of the best midfielders there's ever been. But you were kind of thinking, where does he go in their midfield? Is it a little bit the same with Havertz?
I'm not sure, because I think with Ballack, it was fairly clear he was coming in that right side of midfield role. That you had Makelele holding, or Essien holding, and then you had Lampard to the left and him to the right. So that was maybe a slightly more withdrawn role than he played at Leverkusen. But I think it is different to Havertz in that I genuinely have no idea which Havertz's best position is. And to an extent, that's a good thing. To an extent, it's a problem. I think we should also bear in mind he did have COVID, so that as well as being a young player in a new team, I think it's still pretty early days to be writing him off. But at the same time, he is the one summer signing who hasn't quite fitted yet. I sort of thought this. I remember saying before the Leeds game that this run of 3 games was going to be the real test. That they'd gone. Before the Leeds game, they'd gone 16 games unbeaten. 17 with Leeds. But those previous 16, it had been quite obvious in all of them what they had to do. That there were good teams that they defended against and got 0-0 draws, and there were weaker teams they could just attack. And the defence was clearly better than it had been last season, and so that problem seemed to have been resolved. But I thought this run of 3 games would really test their capacity to offer a realistic attacking threat, which they didn't offer in the home game against Sevilla, which they didn't offer against Manchester United, that they didn't offer against Tottenham, while also protecting against the counter-attack, which was such a problem for them last season. And they were so good against Leeds, I sort of thought, it's fine. They've sorted that out. And I thought Leeds would be the hardest of the 3, given the injury problems Everton and Wolves have had. And the one thing that did occur to me in that Leeds game, I didn't really kind of make much of a play of it because it seemed slightly out of keeping with the rest of the game, was when Pobeda went down, when the score was 2-1, and could have had a penalty. Say Leeds had got that penalty, and say they'd scored it. Suddenly that's 2-2 with a quarter of an hour to go, or 10 minutes to go, whatever it was. Would Chelsea have got a third goal? I mean, maybe they would have done, I don't know. But we could have been talking then about 2 cheap points dropped. And I sort of feel that what's happened since makes that incident feel more meaningful than it did at the time. That against Everton, it was a really good game. It was a 50-50 game. They certainly didn't play badly. And they get done with a long ball and the keeper conceding a daft penalty. And they could have conceded the second penalty. There was fractionally offside because he didn't defend the counter. What happens against Wolves is a corner. Corners were also problems from last season. Corner's not cleared properly. There's a few stages, but they don't get it clear. And Podence scores with a deflection. And then they sort of lose discipline a bit and they get done on the counter. And Kurt Zima's positioning is really bad. And he doesn't seem to recognise that Neto is going to be working onto his left foot. Had he gone tighter to him, then maybe Reece James could have got back. But he sort of just kept backing off and let Neto into the box. So it's essentially saying, go on and have a shot. I don't think you're going to score. But it's on Neto's stronger foot and he finishes it really well. So, look, it's not a crisis by any means. And they haven't played badly in these last 2 games. But it does sort of feel like points frittered away in the way they frittered away points against Southampton and West Brom, games when they were the better side earlier in the season. So that doubt about are they realistic title contenders, the squad is definitely good enough. I take Lampard's point, they might not be experienced enough. But defensively, despite the improvements we've seen in these last 2 matches, they do still have a tendency to give away soft goals.
Yeah, perhaps still that weak underbelly at the moment that may disappear with time. Touch on West Ham quickly. Thomas Souček, Martin, I mean, a fantasy football dream at the moment, cheap, popping up with goals. Had him in my team in the first couple of weeks and then got fed up with him and got rid of him. Wish I hadn't done that. But yeah, a good signing. And they've made a couple of good signings, savvy signings, West Ham.
Yeah, I think, like you say, Souček, fantasy football dream. I've had him from the very start. 4.5 million fantasy Premier League. Why you'd get rid of him, I don't know, Dan. You don't get rid of the best cheap player in the game. He's your sub every game until you think he's going to score. But yeah, he's been a real weapon, and that's just a big oversight on Fantasy Premier League's part, because he's scored goals consistently. Obviously in the Czech Republic before now, but even last season he popped up with quite a few. Popped up with one against Chelsea, and I know one of Jonathan's bugbears with Chelsea is their ability to defend cross-set plays. And is there a better player at attacking than Thomas Souček? He had a goal disallowed in that game last season as well, so he was a real sort of thorn in their side. Scored a couple recently, so he'll be a big danger. And I think Vladimir Koufal's been an excellent signing as well. Obviously played with Souček, and I imagine he had quite a big part to play in that transfer. And it was like, I think it was when West Ham were getting a lot of criticism for not having signed any players, and they bought Koufal, and obviously, understandably, the fans didn't know anything about him and they were really underwhelmed. But I think he's already a fan favourite. He played really well in midweek. It's got good delivery, links up well with Souček. So they've actually made some good signings after what looked like a bit of a nightmare window. I think it's good to see Sebastian Haller scoring goals and scoring that fantastic goal in midweek. He's another one similar to Joelinton, where you need to get players up around him. He was so good with Luka Jovic in Germany, and I just don't think he's had that support around him for much of his time at West Ham. They haven't got players close enough to him, so that's why he struggled. But I think he's an excellent player. He can be an excellent player, so I hope that he'll continue to prove that. So yeah, they'll cause Chelsea problems, I'm sure, and they can go above Chelsea if they win this game. So interesting one to watch.
Fair enough. Let's look at the other games now in just a minute. So Martin and Jonathan have a minute to go over the remaining fixtures. We're going to have to be strict on time this week because I think we've been talking for a fair while. So Jonathan, I'm going to start with you. It's Palace.
I'm sorry. Let me get my stopwatch ready. Okay. Come on. Where's the timer? Okay.
Yeah, ready? Palace v Liverpool, your first game.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is Roy Hodgson against Liverpool, and there's history there, shall we say. His record against Liverpool is actually pretty poor. That he's met them 15 times, only won 3. He's lost 5 of the 5 he's played against Klopp. So there's not a huge amount of hope for Palace in those stats. But where there is hope is that Liverpool have only won 1 of their 6 away games. That the fact they topped the league is based on winning 7 out of 7 at home. And for whatever the reason, they're not quite as effective away from home as they are at Anfield, which when there's no crowd doesn't make a huge lot of sense. I think Palace going forward have been much better this season now that Eze's come in to support Zaha. There's less pressure on Zaha. He doesn't get targeted by defenders as much, but they will be going into this game without Benteke, who was sent off against West Ham. Liverpool obviously have a whole raft of injuries, but they seem to have a squad to deal with that. But yeah, Palace have been getting results, so this is a test of Liverpool's away form.
Very good, Martin. Everton v Arsenal.
So after a long spell without a goal, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang has obviously scored at both ends in the space of a week. The Arsenal captain actually has a good record against Everton. He's scored 4 goals in 5 appearances against them, so he'll be keen to build on that strike against Southampton. That goal was enough to move Arsenal level on par with Dominic Calvert-Lewin in Premier League goals this season on 11. This is another game, another one of 3, I think, this weekend, where a manager facing their former sort of playing club anyway, as far as Mikel Arteta is concerned. He desperately needs a win, obviously, having managed to avoid the gold medal in the sack race to Slaven Bilic. However, the Gunners haven't managed a victory at Goodison since a certain Mesut Ozil was on the score sheet in a 5-2 win over 3 years ago now. Toffees will continue to be about Luca Dean, but Seamus Coleman should return, and James Rodriguez also has a chance. I think, however, after 2 excellent wins in his absence, Ancelotti may look to extend that rest for the Colombian in a game like this, and it'll be interesting to see whether Robin Olsen continues in goal, having replaced Jordan Pickford. For Arsenal, Gabriel joins Granit Xhaka.
You done, Martin. I'm going to be strict.
Go.
Too long. You were too long, Martin. Yellow card. Jonathan, Newcastle v Fulham.
But if you'll indulge me in a theory, and this was something that I don't know if you remember the Argentina centre-back Juan Simon, who played for Boca, something he mentioned to me years ago. And he said the effect of playing a Bielsa side he said it was like being run over by a tractor. You just left exhausted. So I then thought to myself, what happens to teams in the game after they've played Leeds? And so there's been 13 games this season, but obviously one of those is Newcastle who are playing this game. So those previous 12 games, after playing against Leeds, teams have only won 3. Only 3 of those 12 sides have won the next game. 6 of them have lost. And if you look at some of those results, they are poor results. So I think one of the wins was City against a City win. They won 1-0 when they would have expected to win comfortably. So on that basis and Fulham's improved form, I think it's a great chance for Fulham to get a result against the Newcastle side, still feeling the effects of the COVID thing, and who may be tired from playing Leeds.
Bang on. A minute. Martin, Brighton, Sheffield United for you. Walking the tightrope now with that early yellow card. Off you go.
So this is a meeting between the only 2 teams without a single home win this season, ahead of Sheffield United's Thursday night clash with Manchester United. So something may well give this weekend, with the Blades without so much as a point on the road. Danny Welbeck started his 6th consecutive Premier League match in midweek, managing that feat for the first time in over 6 years. So he could be due a rest. Neil Maupay was dropped in that game, having had the 5th most shots since the start of last season, but ranking outside the top 20 in goal. So that highlights his wastefulness in front of goal, which brings me nicely on to Sheffield United. Ollie McBurney was the match winner in this fixture last season, but no player has had more big chances this season without scoring any of them. That's 7. The Scot did open his account for the campaign in defeat to Leicester, but he's a doubt with a shoulder injury. So Chris Wilder will also have to turn to another misfiring forward, with new signings Ollie Burke and Rhian Brewster still yet to score.
Yeah, you've done one under the pressure there. Under a minute for you. Jonathan, Tottenham v Leicester.
Well, I think this is a fascinating game. There's obviously the history of the 2 managers that Brendan Rodgers used to work for Jose Mourinho. But when they've met 7 times, Mourinho's won 5, 2 draws. So Rodgers yet to lay a glove on Mourinho. And the most famous of those, the game at Anfield that cost Liverpool the title against Chelsea back in Rodgers' great season there. I do have reservations about Tottenham, which we were discussing earlier. The fact they do seem to give away so many points late in games, and maybe they do drop too deep. So I don't know if we're doing betting tips, but if we are, I might be looking at Spurs to be ahead at half time, but not to be ahead at full time. And Spurs just seem to have had a little bit of a setback. They had those 3 very testing games against City, against Chelsea and Arsenal. They came through those very well. And it's almost like they've relaxed and suddenly points have started to be dropped. So 3 points dropped in the last 2 games. Leicester have lost 3 of their last 5, but they have won every away game this season, apart from the game at Anfield when they're well beaten. They're without Johnny Evans, who's suspended, plus Soyuncu, so no centre-backs.
Very good. Nice new section in there as well. The Wilson wager. Will go now to Martin for his final game, West Brom v Villa.
So it's the first Midlands derby between these 2 sides since Villa knocked out their rivals in the Championship playoffs via a penalty shootout en route to promotion. That said, Villa haven't actually got a win at the Hawthorns in their last 8 trips since goals from John Carew and Gabby Agbonlahor were enough for a 2-1 win in 2008. With Bilic relieved of his duties on Wednesday, Sam Allardyce has already been appointed, having never previously been relegated in his managerial career. He's been out of management for over 2 years since leaving Everton and hasn't overseen a full season in any job since leaving West Ham in 2015. At the time of recording, Villa have 3 games in hand on most of the league, ahead of their meeting with Burnley on Thursday evening, but are within 3 points of the top 6 still. Their clean sheet at Molineux was their 4th of the season already away from home, having been the only side to fail to keep a single one away from home last season. Emi Martinez was obviously the man of the match last weekend, while former Villa keeper Sam Johnston was the star man for the Baggies in midweek against Man City.
Yep, former Villa keeper as well, Sam Johnston. Jonathan, your last game is Burnley against Wolves.
Well, until the Chelsea game, I was a bit worried about Wolves. And Nuno said after that Chelsea game that he's concerned by the way they don't seem to be able to put a 90-minute performance together. Now, it was good enough the 45 minutes that they played against Chelsea to get the win, but I still don't think that they're the best. I think they really miss Raul Jimenez. Obviously, Jota left in the summer. Johnny's out as well. No Bolly, no Dendoncker. So those are big players who are missing for them. So I think this is an opportunity for Burnley, and the kind of game they probably need to start getting something out of if they are going to survive. They are playing better. I mean, before tonight's game, they've only lost 1 of their last 5, but goals are still a massive problem for them. They only scored 6 all season. One of those was the slightly bizarre Aubameyang own goal last week. But 3 of those goals have come in the last 4 games. So they are improving. Can Wolves stand up to the physical pressure? I guess that's the test for them. But you feel that Burnley really need to get at least a point out of this if they are going to stay up.
Very good. And Martin, we won't carry that yellow card over into the next show in case you were worried. Now it's time for the long shot. So good form from you guys in the long shot last week, with Palace getting a point at Spurs and Burnley winning at Arsenal. Not so much for me, as I think I called West Brom to get something against Newcastle, and they did not. So what are you two going with this week?
I don't know if it counts as it feels cheap just to pick whichever team's playing Newcastle. But given Newcastle have far more points than makes any sense, they've got to start losing eventually. And Fulham are playing really well. So I don't know if Fulham away at Newcastle counts as a long shot, but that seems to me somewhere where I might be looking.
I'm going to go against sort of what Jonathan said earlier, that they might struggle, and I'm going to go with Leeds at Manchester United. I just think they'll be too intense for them, kind of like RB Leipzig were at the start of that game. And if Manchester United don't start the game well, and obviously they haven't done quite often this season, then I think they could get overrun. And then even if Leeds take the lead and Manchester United then have to come out, that's when it starts to suit Leeds, I think. So I think they could get a result there. Obviously, that would actually be their first win at Old Trafford in the Premier League era. So that's the only club that they haven't managed to win against, that they've played more than 5 times, having won earlier in the season at Goodison Park. They'd never done that in 14 attempts, and they did that. So I think I'm going to back Leeds to end that run at Old Trafford. They've never won there, but in the Premier League anyway. But Bielsa certainly has. In 2012 with Athletic Club, when they outclassed Alex Ferguson's Manchester United over 2 legs in 2012. So, yeah, I'm going to go for Leeds to beat. I'm going to go all out, beat Manchester United this weekend.
And to finish, I'm obviously wrongly going to go for Palace to take something against Liverpool at Selhurst Park. I think Liverpool would have put a lot into the midweek game against Spurs, and I fancy Palace to do something like they did against Spurs last weekend. We end, as ever, with the trivia reveal. So, Jonathan, you've had a little bit of time to think about it. Do you want a reminder of the question, or are you okay to go?
I'm quite happy, I think.
Yeah. You think you've got it?
Well, I'm pretty confident of one of them. So the Norwegian, There's only 2 realistic candidates, and Solskjaer would be too obvious. So it must be Eric Bakker.
Correct. Solskjaer did come on in that game, though.
Oh, yeah. And then the Brazilian. I mean, part of me thinks it was that clown that Brazil had at centre back, whose name escapes me. But given I can't remember his name, I have 2 Manchester United options. But I think Anderson came too late, and therefore I will say Kleberson.
Oh, he's done it. He's done it. I had that weird Leeds Brazilian centre back in my head as well. His name Chris or something. That's the only name that's popping into my head. No, because
he'd been in the World Cup squad, hadn't he? He wasn't actually a bad player. He was just terrible in that side.
Is it Roque Junior? No.
Yes.
Was it Roque Junior? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But no,
he was there that season, wasn't he?
Yeah, possibly. He would have been. Definitely didn't start that game though. But I don't know if he was there.
No,
yeah, didn't start.
Oh, Jonathan,
tried to throw you with the Solskjaer, so you did well to sidestep that one.
Why would you ask if it had been Solskjaer? Would have been a bad question. I'd have been disappointed in you if you'd asked that question.
Bit of reverse psychology, maybe thinking that you wouldn't say it. So yeah, you've done him. Jonathan, thoughts?
Well, obviously I'm delighted, and my fear now is to start to become trick questions and double bluffs.
I'm trying to keep it fair, so they are sort of at least gettable, which they clearly are. But yeah, I'll stay as fair as possible. Don't worry.
And I respect that in you.
Thank you very much.
I think we've got a few weeks hiatus as well with the Christmas period coming up now, so you've both got time to go away, get back in the dressing room and regroup. So all that's left to do is say thanks to everyone for watching or listening. We are going to take a little winter break, but make sure you join us again in the new year. Happy Christmas and a great new year from all of us as well, and enjoy the football this weekend.